it talks about 1970s, and we'll totally miss the point until we know what happened, what was in the air in 1970. So one of the things that we have to take into account, okay, is what happened in the 1970s. The first thing has to do with Bretton Woods system and its failure. Has to do with the kind of economic situation, the financial situation. So, I mean, the Bretton Woods system actually takes its name, say, after the Second World War between industrialized countries in the way how to do business. And however, in the 1970s, that system came to an end. So the idea was that a new system of trading and exchange was required. Therefore, that system was, was about to fail. The second thing that we should take into account has to do with contraceptive pill. That played a very important role because, in the 1970s now it was not only required, but it was even expected for females to, to work, and they were not the baby boomers generation in America was over. Okay, so that was very, very, very important. That totally changed the roles between gender, the role that females would play in society at large. Another important thing has to do with the oil crisis of 1973, and the organization of petroleum exporting countries, out of a sudden, they decided not to export any more oil to America and to some Western European countries, as America at that time was supporting the Israeli-Arab war, as it was, called, and even though it lasted for some weeks, it had a very big impact on world economy at large. The energy crisis that we are aware today actually started at that time. So now, why was it important, all these factors, apart from because we see some tension in the air in the 1970s. We see some tension. And then we have to come to political now, from the larger picture to a picture in miniature. How about Britain? In the 1970s in Britain we have political racism. So we have the Tories, the Conservatives, or the so-called New Right, led by Thatcher, coming to power. And what was their the main idea of Thatcher was just British identity, to preserve and retain British identity. And that was the time when, in the air, there were ideas of, bringing immigration to an end. So for this particular reason, all this immigrants, first-generation immigrants, they were at loss, right? And they found it very, very hard under Tories, okay, to make it in Britain. As we will see later in the novel, all the characters, they manifest the tension that was in the early 1970s. We have the punk, the hippie movement, music, fashion in the air. So things that we have, we take it for granted nowadays, but things that at the time were pretty new. We have so many, music groups. First, art, rock and roll. We have hard rock. We have pop music. We have all the beginnings. I don't want to deal at length with the punk movement and the hippie movement, but to summarize it in one single sentence, rebellion was in the air. Self-expression was the main slogan. People wanted to express themselves in 100 different ways, but still most of them failed because they were caught in this whirlpool of of not knowing what to do, what they were looking for. So 1960s and 70s in general were labeled as, or these people in general were labeled as rebels without a cause. So it was something that happened. I mean, it's very hard to really identify what happened in the 1990s and 60s, but we're for sure that something happened. What happened is it totally changed. People thought of themselves, people thought of their families, people thought of doing business. That's what I'm trying to say. So the impact of the 70s was more important than what they really achieved in the 1970s. So to come to the main themes, immigration to England. Now in this novel, we have the main characters, Harun, very funny actually. You know, the kind of person who has gone to Britain hoping to go back, but he would never go back, get married there, and be in that limbo, the kind of thing that I would call like neither black. And why, while reading about this conference, why I decided I had worked on this novel many years ago. So I thought, yeah, Harun is the kind of person who is looking, looking for something. His spiritual quest is so touching and so touchable. I mean, what he did actually towards the end of the novel, he started to practice Buddhism, because that's the only thing that he felt familiar with. I mean, and he would deliver this yoga sessions and some Buddhist, mixture it with some Buddhist ideas here and there, but he was nothing else but a charlatan of Buddhism in itself, actually, because he was not a religious person. So it's very funny to read for some of you who decide to read this novel. It's very improper. It's to some extent even immoral, but still it's so funny how these characters they look for identity. And then we have sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We have Karim, the main character. He's the kind of person that represents 70s when, I mean, he wants to experience almost everything, and that's how the novel itself starts. It says, quote, "I was looking for trouble, any kind of movement, action, and sexual interest I could find, because things were so gloomy, so slow, and heavy in our family, and I don't know why." Now, to come to this idea, the novel is called The Buddha of Suburbia, because Harun, Karim's father, he decides to become a Buddhist priest and preacher. At the time, who knows very little or nothing, right, about Buddhism himself. And Suberbia is not in West London, and in the 70s, all these immigrants coming mainly from India and Pakistan, they were located in the suburbs of London, and they were far removed from their reality, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to go closer to the center, because closer the British, culture, society, music, the energy of the whole city was located in the center. So that's what they tried to do. Oh, let's do this. Let's get closer to the city. Let's, even Karim himself, he tries all he could to get to know, people in order to make it, get closer towards the center, become an actor or something. Then rags and riches, the class society is pretty much there. We have the lower classes represented by Karim's family, and the higher classes, Ted and Jean, and that's reflected in lifestyle, education, social circle. At that time, if you had a garden, if you had a nice house, that's how you could become part of the higher classes. So all these immigrants, they desired this climbing up the so-called social ladder, even though they rarely manage to do that. So identity and success. I mean, the characters in the novel, even though they're not quite aware of what they're looking for, they label success in many different ways. Karim, for example, he wants to become an actor. Charlie, a British person, he is also, he has got fame, he is to some extent famous, he's not happy, he doesn't really know what he's looking for, right? So what I'm trying to say is that those who don't have an identity and success, they keep trying and starving and trying hard to get some success. At the time when those who have already some success, they're not enjoying it. That's the kind of atmosphere that the characters in this novel are going through. But we'll miss the point unless we know what was in the air in the 1970s. Then we have the suburbs of the London, kind of soulless places. I mean, in terms of not religion, but people coming from Pakistan, from Pakistan and from India mainly. I mean, they felt like a fish out of water in the new reality. They were you know, discriminated, prejudiced. You know, their appearance, they look Pakistani, they look Indian. It's different with people coming from other countries. But if you look Pakistani, you can't say. Even Hanif Kureishi himself, and this is a semi-autobiographical novel, and Hanif Kureishi himself has had similar problems with his identity, with his, you know, personal interest, with his family. Even his family members, you know, accuse him of washing, in English it's called washing the dirty lines in public, because some of this stories actually were part and parcel of his family life. And so even he himself represents and looks like Karim in many ways. But all the characters, my point is that the suburbs, don't think of suburbs as well organized, you know, in enough parking places, big houses. No, far from that. 70s, the suburbs that Kureishi depicts and portrays, they were dirty, they're small, crowded places where you know, immigrants would because they couldn't afford living, you know, in posh quarters or near the center. So spiritual quest mainly comes through this main character, as I said, Harun. His character is typically Indian. Whenever there is a problem, he first has to meditate to find a solution to it. Nothing should be decided too quickly. This stoical way of living is typically Indian. He doesn't really care about real job either. Being happy and confident in life is the most important thing for Harun. Material goods are not basic to him as they are to many others. But how on earth could he make it in a materialistic society like the British one, right? So that's his main dilemma. Actually, that's his main dilemma. He lived in Britain, hoping that his I'm calling it spiritual, but it's not real. It's not real religion. It's just because in literature, at least in this novel, spirituality takes the upper hand rather than religion. And Kureishi himself, he makes fun of Harun, and it's a very funny novel indeed. So that's his dilemma, right? That's his main dilemma, because his spiritual background couldn't materialize in Britain, and that's what he does. He tries to make a living by teaching yoga and some spiritualism, which is a very funny, reduced, ridiculous spiritualism to neighbors and to people interested in because in the 70s, people out of a sudden, they try to find hope and salvation in Far Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and stuff. So they thought, and he thought that there's some market for that. It's very funny. There's some market. I could make a living out of this. So, and then identity crisis of the 70s, which I have just tried to quest for home in the sense where you feel at home, community. But for first generation immigrants, it was difficult. It has always been difficult. Even other British authors who were born in Britain, they have this problem. Carol Phillips is another one who has this problem. He says, I am British. He was not born in British, but he says, I have nieces a nephew is born in Britain.